All right, get ready, Jake. All right.
Shema Israel, Yahweh Yahweh Echad, v'yivtevet Yahweh v'kol avek v'kol sheker v'kol ma'odeka. Hear Israel, Yahweh is your Elohim, and Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh, your Elohim, with our heart, with our being, and with our strength.
All right. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Greetings to the people on the Outreach Ministry. Well, this is the third message in this series. It was only planned to be two, but there were some questions that came up. And let me say this. There are, a couple of people here who did not hear the first two messages. I apologize to them because they're coming in on a third message, but you will be able to get those. Those will be on the next DVD. All three of these messages will be on the same DVD. So if you're on the DVD program and you're picking this one first, don't do it. Go back to the first message on this DVD. After I had finished, and I did not preface this with, by the way, this is not a salvation issue. Yahweh doesn't need us. Was not the purpose of this for us to tell Yahweh who the two witnesses are. It was the purpose for us to study what His Word says and to see if He reveals it to us. Okay? And so if somebody doesn't see the logic in this, I would suggest you go back and read the Scriptures again, because I think the Scriptures are pretty plain. I think Yahweh is telling us something. But there are some questions that arise as a result of teachings that we've had in the past about who the two witnesses are. Some people have been taught that Moses and Elijah are going to be the two witnesses based on a vision, because they don't see it as a vision, but Yahshua calls it a vision that occurs in the Gospels. We're going to look at that vision today, and we're going to analyze it and say, is that what that was telling us? And is it possible? Some people may have been taught that some other prophets of Yahweh were on the docket, if you will, to be the two witnesses. So we're going to look at some of the favorite people, favorite prophets. They were all prophets of Yahweh, and we're going to answer the question: could any of those be the two witnesses in Revelation chapter 11? Again, it's not a salvation issue, but there is a purpose in looking at it, because if Yahweh does reveal this to us, then it is one more reason why the end of the age will not come as a thief in the night to us, isn't it? If we can understand the events and the prophets that will be prophesying before that. Another question that was asked is, would the messengers be considered prophets? Could they be considered prophets? Another question was, well, since the two witnesses, as we saw, are able to shut up the heavens, they have the authority to shut up the heavens, then those people who were taught that Elijah was one of the prophets, they use the fact that Elijah shut up the heavens for 3 years. Did he? They believe he did, and I see some of you say he did, but we're going to see who did shut up the heavens. It wasn't Elijah. Yes. So we're going to look at that, and we're going to see that, because that is often compared to what those two witnesses do, and they conclude that, well, since Elijah did that once, then is this Elijah doing it again? So we're going to look at that. There are some questions. But first of all, let's look at a few of Yahweh's favorite prophets, if you will. And I consider them favorites of Yahweh because everyone that I'm going to mention here, except Elisha, appears in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. And it's in a place where Yahweh pretty much tells us that they're going to be in the kingdom. Okay? So let's look at Enoch first. I don't know. There may be people who teach. Anybody ever heard that maybe one of those or even a speculation that one of those two witnesses might be Enoch? I think I have heard that. Yeah, I see people say yes. I've heard that. All right, well, let's look at Enoch. You know, there's very little in the scriptures about Enoch. But what is there is quite interesting. Genesis 5, and he does appear in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, by the way. Genesis 5:21. Hanok, which is closer to the Hebrew transliteration of Enoch, lived 65 years and brought forth Methuselah. So he was the father of Methuselah. And after he brought forth Methuselah, Hanok walked with Elohim 300 years and brought forth sons and daughters. Now, if this guy is walking with Elohim, do you think it's far-fetched to say that Enoch was probably doing, if he was walking with Yahweh, do you think he was doing any witnessing? Do you think he might have been doing some prophesying? Think he might have been a prophet, even though the scripture never calls him a prophet. But the work of a prophet is what makes a person a prophet, not the fact that somebody translated something from the scriptures and found the title prophet for him. All right, verse 23, Genesis 5:23. So all the days of Hanok were 365 years, and Hanok, here it says this again, walked with Elohim. Then he was no more, for Elohim took him. Well, what does that mean? Some people will look at that and they say, well, that means that he didn't die. That means that, Yahweh just took him up to heaven. The Hebrew word here is lakach, which those of us that took some Hebrew, if you remember, lakach was one of the words in the vocabulary that we learned, and it means to take. So it is properly translated, taken. He was taken. All right? Notice what it says in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, about Enoch. By belief, Hanok was translated. Well, we didn't read that in the Old Testament, did we? It didn't say translated. It says he was taken. So as not to see death. We're going to have a little conflict here. We're going to have something called a difficult scripture and a contradiction. In a difficult scripture, because so as not to see death, and was not found, because Elohim had not taken, or not translated, but taken. That's what it says in the Old Testament. And if you look at the Hebrew New Testament, the word here is lakach. I-T. No. Lakach. You would transliterate it L-A. You could say K-O-K, because that's what it sounds like, lakach. That would be the transliteration. And it's a good thing you asked that, Maria, because Murdy was about to. Right, Murdy? Lakach. And it means to take, to take. So this in the Hebrew says, it doesn't say he was translated. It says he was taken. For before his being taken, he obtained witness that he pleased Elohim. Now, he's mentioned in the book of Hebrews. We're going to look at one more statement about him and about what this taken so that he wouldn't see death means. Now, we can look at it at just the English translation, and we can say, well, it just means just what it says. Well, then, if that's true, then we have a conflict in the scriptures. Can you trust the script? If you can't reconcile difficult conflicts in the scriptures, can you rely on the scriptures? Which way is it? All right? Well, we're going to come back to him. All right? The next one we're going to look at is Noah, or Noach. Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6. I think Noach qualifies to be one of Yahweh's favorites, favorites, because it says Noah found favor. So if you find favor, aren't you somebody's favorite? In the eyes of Yahweh. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with Elohim. I say he qualifies to be one of Yahweh's favorites. Why? Was he a prophet? Yeah. Because how long did it take him to build the ark? 150 years. And what do you think? I mean, he was building an ark up a big boat somewhere on dry ground. You don't think people were coming? I mean, if you wear a menorah with Yahweh on it and people come and ask you, if you were building a great big ark, isn't somebody going to ask you what's going on here? You're building this big boat in the middle of dry land. How are you going to get it to water? And what do you suppose Noah would tell them? You think he'd just hem-haw and kind of hang his head and be ashamed? No, I'm sure he worded to them exactly what was going to come to pass for 150 years. Verse 8 of chapter 9, Genesis chapter 9 and verse 8. So here's Noah walking with Elohim. Elohim spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. I think that qualifies as being a favorite of Yahweh. Down in chapter 9 and verse 28, and Noah lived after the flood 350 years, so all the days of Noah were 950 years. And what happened to him? He died. It says Noah walked with Elohim. And didn't it say that about Enoch? He walked with Elohim. He was a favorite of Elohim. But here it says, and he died. In Hebrews the 11th chapter in verse 7, we read, and by belief Noah. So there he is in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 7. And the scripture says plainly, Noah died. No mistaking that. Now, when Noah died, it doesn't tell us who buried him, but who do you think buried him? Who do you think?
His children.
His children, I'm sure. His family buried him. When Enoch died, his family couldn't bury him, could he? Because Yahweh took him. And so when Yahweh took him, he kind of just disappeared from his family, and they didn't see his death because Yahweh took him. Does that happen to anybody else? Who does it happen to? Somebody says, yes, it happened to somebody else. We're going to see it in a little bit. But who was it? Huh? Moses? Somebody say Moses? I thought so. Yeah, we're going to see that in just a little bit. All right, so there was another favorite of Yahweh, and he died. Abraham, Genesis chapter 25 and verse 7. Of course, when we break into chapter 25 here, we've got the whole history of Abraham, his choosing, his going out from the land, his mistakes that he made, when he saw the Pharaoh and when he saw Abimelech and told them that Sarah was his sister. And you might say, we find out that was a half-truth. Well, is a half-truth total truth? No. So, it was a mistake. He was not totally trusting Yahweh then, but he lived a long life. I think 175 years, I think we're going to find. And Yahweh judged his whole life. And Yahweh made some promises to him. He was definitely a favorite of Yahweh. Chapter 25 and verse 7. And these are all the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last, and what did he do? He died. He died. Do you think Enoch was more precious to Yahweh than Noah and Abraham? Well, I don't think so. I mean, Abraham's pretty special. Yahweh didn't promise to Enoch's children what he promised to Abraham's children. We're not blessed today because of promises that were made to Enoch. We're blessed because of promises that were made to Abraham. And Abraham died in a good old age, aged and satisfied, and was gathered to his people. So, and actually, I think when we read the account, we find that Isaac and Ishmael? Or was it Esau? It was Ishmael. Actually got together then and buried him. I mean, they were kind of enemies, but they got together and buried him. So Yahweh didn't bury him. By belief, in Hebrews the 11th chapter in verse 8, beginning in verse 8, it says, by belief Abraham. And then it goes on and tells the righteous things that Abraham did. But Abraham died. And remember, in Hebrews 11 in verse 5, it mentions Enoch. But it just mentions in Hebrews 11 about Enoch the same thing it said about Enoch back in Genesis. But it does say more about him, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Next one is Moses. Deuteronomy 34, and we know all of the acts of Moses, those of us that have read the Torah a time or two, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 6, or 12. Some of us have been reading the Torah every year for that long, so we're pretty well acquainted with the acts of Moses. We know of his mistakes, but we know that Yahweh blessed him. We know that Yahweh punished people who came against him, don't we? Does he qualify as being one of Yahweh's favorites? I'd say he does. I'd say he does. And we're going to see some more things about Moses here in just a minute. So Moses, the servant in chapter 34, verse 5, Deuteronomy chapter 34 and verse 5, after all of his patience, I mean, Moses even offered to give himself so that Yahweh wouldn't wipe out all the people. Because Yahweh said, well, I'm going to wipe out all these people at one point, and I'm going to make your children the inheritors. And, I'm going to do away with Israel. And Moses interceded, and he said, well, no. He said, if you're going to do that, just wipe me out. Just take me off the face of the earth. And so he got Yahweh to relent on that and to continue with this stiff-necked, hard-hearted people called Israel. So Moses, the servant of Israel, in chapter 34 of Deuteronomy in verse 5, died in the land of Moab according to the mouth of Yahweh. And he, Yahweh, buried him in a valley in the land of Moab. Now, somebody might say, well, if this is what Yahweh did to Enoch, then why doesn't it just say here that Yahweh took him? Well, this is a different writer, actually, and a different editor, because by the time Deuteronomy comes along, Ezra does some editing. There's some things in the book of Deuteronomy, and this is a long period of time that transpires from Genesis 5 to Deuteronomy chapter 35. So that's not a very good argument. It's not a very good argument. But Yahweh buried him in the land of Moab, opposite Bet Peor, and no one knows his burial place today. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, for nor his freshness gone. And the children of Israel wept for Moshe in the desert plains of Moab 30 days, and the days of weeping and mourning for Moshe were completed. And then in Hebrews the 11th chapter, what I like to call this the saved chapter, because Yahweh pretty much indicates here that these people who are named in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, have got it made, but where are they? So in Hebrews 11:23, by belief, Moshe did all the things that he did. The next one, and he's a favorite candidate for some people as being one of the two witnesses, is Elijah. 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 9. And we just recently read through the whole life of Elijah, because we were going through we're going through the prophets, the various prophets of Yahweh, and the only place you really read about Elijah in detail is in Kings. So in 1 Kings especially. So we read all of the deeds that Elijah did, all the witnessing to the kings of Israel, the witnessing and the destruction of the prophets of Baal, the prophecy about what was going to happen to Ahab, and Jezebel, his wife. Elijah was the one who prophesied that the dogs would lick up her blood when she died. But that didn't happen in his lifetime. Whose lifetime did it happen in? Elisha's. At least as far as we know. Okay? Because it never tells us in the scripture when Elijah died. Does it? Well, in chapter 2 of 2 Kings in verse 9, let's read the end of his life. Not the end of his life, but let's read what people think was the end of his physical life. It came to be when they passed over, Elijah and Elisha are together. Yahweh has told Elijah to pick Elisha to succeed him in the prophecy. And they were going across the Jordan. And when they passed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "Ask what I am to do for you before I am," here it is, lakach, before I am taken away from you. And Elisha said, "Please let a double portion of your ruach be upon me." And Elijah said, "Well, you have made it hard to ask. Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it's yours. But if not, it's not yours." And it came to be, as they continued on and spoke, that see, a chariot of fire with horses of fire, which separated the two of them, and Eliyahu, went up by a whirlwind into the heavens. So a lot of people think that, Elijah never died, because he was taken up into heaven, into the heavens, it says. Any of you ever been to the heavens? You just were. I have been. In an airplane. He went in a chariot of fire. Tim?
Could that have been something like a spaceship?
Well, it says it was a chariot of fire. That's all we can go by.
Kind of what a spaceship looked like.
But where did he go? Where did he go? It says he went up into the heavens. Which heaven was it? There's one heaven that's not thousands and millions of miles up there. It's a spiritual heaven. And it's just like on the other side of the physical that we see. But I don't think that's where Elijah was taken, because there is a statement that says no one has gone there. Would no one include Elijah? I think so. So what's going on here? All right. So he went up by a whirlwind into the heavens, which undoubtedly is the heavens that we can see where we have gone in airplanes. And in verse 12, Elisha saw it. And he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own garments and tore them in 2 pieces. Why do you suppose he did that? I mean, surely he realized that, hey, I saw him leave, so that means I'm going to have a double portion of his ruach. You know, that also means probably double portion of his responsibility. But now, after this happens, here's a scripture that occurs a minimum of 4, maybe as long as 6 years after the chariot of fire took Elijah. It's in 2 Chronicles chapter 21 and verse 9. All right? Elisha has gone up into the heavens, not in a Boeing 747, but in something that Yahweh caused to be written, a chariot of fire. 4 to 6 years later, this happens. Jehoram went out with his officers and all his chariots with him, and it came to be that he rose by night and smote the Edomites who had surrounded him, and the commander of the chariots. Thus the Edomites revolted from under the hand of Yehudah to this day. Then Livnah revolted under his hand, because he had forsaken Yahweh Elohim of his fathers. He had also made high places in the mountains of Yehudah, and caused, this is the king of Yehudah now, and he happened to be one of the few bad kings of Yehudah, totally bad. And he caused the inhabitants of Jerusalem to commit whoring, and led Yehudah astray. So this is where, Elijah is sent as a prophet to the king of Yehudah. 4 to 6 years after he went up in the chariot, the fiery chariot. And a letter came to him, to King Jehoram, from Eliyahu the prophet, from Elijah, the one that went up in the whirlwind. Well, if he's already in heaven, why didn't he just send Elisha? Because he's somewhere on the earth. He's just somewhere where Yahweh deposited him and let him live out the rest of his life. 4 to 6 years. Got that? Elijah sent a letter after he went in the up in the chariot of fire. And he said, "Thus says Yahweh, Elohim of your father David, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, or in the ways of Asa, sovereign of Yehudah." And he tells him what's going to happen to him. Did you ever see that before? Some of you did, because I've mentioned it before. And Elijah, let's see, is Elijah, how come I didn't put that Hebrews 11 scripture there? I think Elijah is mentioned in Hebrews 11. Go back there and look real quick. Sorry about that. Elisha is not. I don't think that means that he's not one of the chosen, because there's nothing ever said about Elisha that he was unfaithful. I think Elijah is, let's see, is he mentioned at the end? Gideon, Barak, Shimshah, David, and the prophets who through belief overcame reigns. Well, he would certainly qualify to be in that group. But I guess he is not mentioned by, I don't see his name specifically mentioned. All right, but he's certainly one of those very special prophets of Yahweh. And then there's Elisha. Before we're going to go to some scriptures in Hebrews, the 11th chapter. And we're also going to go and look at what Yahshua had to say. 2 Kings chapter 13 and verse 20. Elisha did pretty much the same kinds of things that Elijah did. He didn't slay the prophets, but he did multiply food and for a widow. He resurrected a young man that he had prophesied to the woman that she would have. And so he did Elijah did a lot of those same things. But in 2 Kings chapter 13 and verse 20, it also says, "And Elisha died, and they buried him." They buried him. "And the raiding bands from Moab came into the land in the spring of the year, and it came to be, So this is many months after he died, and they put him in a tomb. And it came to be, they were burying a man. And there they saw a raiding band. So they cast the man in the tomb of Elisha. And the man fell and touched the bones of Elisha. So his flesh had already rotted off, and it was just bones. And it came to life, and he stood on his feet. So Elisha died. Miracle was done by his remains after he was decomposed. Hebrews 11 verse 13. Hebrews 11 chapter 11 verse 13 now. And it talks about these people, Moses being one of those that is a prime candidate, specifically named here. The prophets, these certainly are these favorite prophets of Yahweh. And it says, in belief, all these died. Is it only the ones that are named? Well, I think we can surmise from some other scriptures that all means all. All of the prophets of Yahweh. There is not a single prophet of Yahweh, ancient prophet of Yahweh, that is alive anywhere, physically or spiritually today. These all died, not having received the promises, but seeing them from a distance, welcomed and embraced them, and confessed that they were aliens and strangers on the earth. Verse 39, Hebrews 11. And having obtained witness through belief, or emunah, which we do find in the New Testament scriptures here, all these did not receive the promise. Elohim having provided what is better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Apart from us. Do you know anybody that you have known in this life that has received the promises? You may have thought as a Christian that you did, but you did not, because no one has received those promises. Hebrews, the 9th chapter, which you don't have in your notes, but you might want to jot it down, and the 27th verse. Hebrews, and this is just a couple chapters earlier, it awaits men to die once. All men to die once. And after this, the judgment. And if someone has to die the second death, then that's not a good thing. That's the lake of fire. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There are a couple of witnesses in Ecclesiastes that tell us what happens to us when we die. When Yahweh is finished with us, like he was with Enoch, Elijah, and all of these others, when Yahweh is finished with the physical part of us, we all have to die once. Ecclesiastes 3:19, for the event of the sons of men is also the event of beasts. One event befalls them, as one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they have all one breath. Man has no advantage over beasts, for all is futile. And of course, he is speaking strictly. This is Solomon writing it, and in his wisdom, he is speaking only of the physical. Everybody physically has to die. Indeed, they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over the beasts. All is empty, like a puff of your breath. All are going to one place. All came from the dust. All return to dust, except Enoch and Elijah. No? All. All. Kol in Hebrew. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men which goes upward? The spirit, and that's the Ruach. It's not the soul, because man is the soul. The soul that sins, it shall die. So it's not the soul, it's the Ruach. It's the essence that Yahweh has put in man that makes him different than animals. That goes to Yahweh, but it is not conscious, as we're going to see in the next scripture. Who knows the spirit of the sons of man which goes upward, and the spirit of the beast which goes down to the earth? So, sorry, as attached as you might get to your dog, your cat, your ferret, when they're gone, they're gone. They're dead all over, just like Rover. And when they're put in the ground, they're not going to be resurrected. Sorry, Billy Graham. Didn't Billy Graham say that your pets are going to be resurrected? They're going to be in heaven waiting for you. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 5. For the living men, humans, know that they shall die. Now, a lot of times we might be in denial and we don't want to face it, but it's appointed to men once to die. It's the way of this life. But the dead know nothing. The dead know nothing. Nor do they have any more reward in the flesh. Because when the flesh dies, the consciousness dies. They don't know anything. Their memory, it says remembrance, but it's actually the zikaron, the memory, is actually forgotten. Also, their love, their hatred, all of their emotions, their envy, have now perished. And they no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. So those people who tell you when you go to a funeral that whoever is in that coffin is up there looking down on you, they're lying. It's a lie. Because it says they don't have any part. They don't have any memory. They don't know what's going on. Oh, how comforting that is. Mom and Dad are not up there looking down at me. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 15. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 15. He's talking about Yahshua here, and he says, which in his, the Messiah's own seasons, he shall reveal, the blessed and only ruler, the sovereign and master of masters, that's Yahshua, who alone has immortality. Does that mean that Paul didn't know what he was talking about, and Elijah and Enoch have immortality somewhere? No. Only Yahshua has immortality. Only Yahshua. All right. What did I do with page 3? I guess I have to go down. Caleb, could you go over there and get me one of those copies of the notes and bring it to me? Can you tell which one it is? Somehow, I've lost page 3. That means I don't have page 4. It's probably down there. Thank you, son. All right. So only Yahshua has immortality. So, could Elijah and Moses be the two witnesses? I mean, it says specifically that Moses died, and at the time of Shaul, Moses was still waiting. Now notice what Yahshua says in John chapter 3. John chapter 3 and verse 10. Yahshua is speaking here. John is recording the encounter of Yahshua with Nicodemus. And notice that Yahshua, in encountering Nicodemus, he says, "Are you a teacher of Israel?" Which Nicodemus was. He was a Pharisee. It looks like he actually became a believer. But at this particular time, he's having this discussion. And Yahshua says, "Are you the teacher of Israel and do not know this? Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak what we know and witness what we have seen, and you do not receive our witness. If you do not believe when I spoke to you about earthly matters, how are you going to believe when I speak to you about the heavenly?" And he says, this is Yahshua, 28, 29, maybe even 30 AD, Common Era, CE. He says, no one has gone up into the heaven. Well, wait a minute. We just read a little while ago that Elijah went up into the heaven. Didn't we? Well, does Yahshua know what he's talking about? Yes, because he's talking about the heaven where Yahweh dwells. That's not where Elijah went. And of course, we saw from the scripture that wherever Elijah went, it was still here on this earth because he sent a letter. So even to this day, at which Yahshua speaks, he says, no one. No one. He doesn't say except Enoch and Elijah. He doesn't say that. He says no one. No one has gone up into the heaven except he who came down from the heavens, the son of Adam, which is Yahshua. Only Yahshua. No man has ascended to heaven. Now there are messengers that, because they're like Yahshua, before Yahshua became man, he could come and go. Just like the three that came down to Abraham. They could come and go. They came down to see if what was being said about Sodom and Gomorrah was altogether true, but no one here is no man. Enoch was a man. Elijah was a man. They are not in the heavens. They are not alive. They are dead, dead, dead. And Yahweh has the recording, the Ruach, from them, and he is going to put it back into a spiritual body, but not before all who are qualified to receive the promises made to Abraham are going to receive the promises altogether. Well, what about this scripture over here in Matthew 17? Matthew 17. Can we reconcile this with what Yahshua said earlier in his ministry when he was talking to Nicodemus, early in John? Matthew 17 and verse 1. After 6 days, and you find this is parallel also in Mark and Luke. After 6 days, Yahshua took Kepha, Peter, Yaakov, and Yochanan, his brother, not the one who wrote the book of John, Yochanan, his brother, and brought them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was, it says, transformed, and I think some scriptures say transfigured. He was changed. He was kind of, we would probably like to use the word hologrammed. He was transformed before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as the light. So they're actually seeing pretty much his esteem. And see, Moshe and Eliyahu appeared to them. Well, how's that? Where did they come from? Did Yahshua or Yahweh call them out of the grave for this meeting? Well, if he did that, then they're going to die again. That's not good. So is that what was going on here? Was it really Moshe and Eliyahu? They recognized them. They were talking with Yahshua in his transfigured state. It's kind of like a hologram. And see, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. And Kepha answering said to Yahshua, Master, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 sukkah, or sukkot, booths. One for you, one for Moshe, and one for Eliyahu. So Peter thought it was real, but he should have known better. But wait a minute, he's kind of in a sleepy trance. While he was speaking, see, while Peter is still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, And see, a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I delight. Hear him." Moses and Elijah don't speak or say anything because they're not really there. They're not really there. Matthew 17:9 says, "And as they were coming down from the mountain, Yahshua commanded them, saying, 'Do not mention the vision.'" It was a vision. You've heard people have dreams, right? Do we read about other visions? When someone has a vision, is what they are seeing real? Is it? Anybody here ever had a vision? No? You've had a vision? Was it real? It wasn't real. It was like a hologram, you know? If they could have gone up there and done this to Eliyahu and Moshe, their hand would have just, cut through. But not because they were spirit beings, because they are not. They have not ascended to the heaven. They're dead, dead, dead. It was a vision. Now, why would Yahshua show Moshe and Elijah in a vision? Mark 9 and verse 4 is another place where this vision occurs. And there are some notes there, and I've recorded those for you. It'd be good for you to read some of those. But one of them is Malachi 4, beginning in verse 4 and 5. Let's go back there and read Malachi 4:4. I think this is one of the things that was brought up in one of the questions. "Remember the Torah," Malachi 4:4, "the Torah of Moshe, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel, laws and right rulings. See, I am sending you Eliah the prophet." Moses and Elijah are not mentioned together very many times in the scripture. They appear there in the vision, but is this a prophecy of that vision? I'm sending you Moses, the Torah of Moses. What does Moses represent? The Torah. What does Elijah represent? He represents in spirit something that is going to be a predecessor to Messiah. To Messiah. Here they are mentioned together. Do you think that's curious? Don't you think that Malachi 4 and 5 belongs as a note to the vision that Yahshua gave to Peter, Yochanan, and Yaakov? It's the only places they're mentioned together. And he says, "I am sending you Eliah the prophet before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh." In Luke chapter 1 and verse 17, Luke chapter 1 and verse 17, this is the messenger Gabriel speaking to the father of Yochanan, the immerser, even before his conception. And he says, "He shall go forth, this son of yours, before him," capital H, and it should be because it's talking about the Messiah, "before the great and awesome day of Yahweh," if you will. "He shall go before him in the spirit and power of Eliyahu." Does that mean when Yahweh told, and which Yahweh was speaking in Malachi 4? You think it was the Father? Or was it the Yahweh who became the messenger? So they're all three there, aren't they? And he is saying, "I am going to send Eliyahu, the prophet," but here, Gabriel, he understood what he was talking about. This child of yours is going to come in the spirit and the power of Eliyahu to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the disobedient to the insight of the righteous. So here he's sending him in the spirit. And what kind of spirit and power did Eliyahu have? Oh, read his life. He could resurrect. Did he actually withhold rain? No, Yahweh says he withheld the rain. I think we're gonna see that. Yeah, we are in 1 Kings 18. So he's sending him in the spirit. Is he going to send Elijah? Literally send Elijah? So some people read that and they say, well, yeah, he's going to literally send. The word literal is not in there. And just like Matthew 17 tells you about a vision, it's not literal. It's symbolic. And it's symbolic of the spirit and the power of Elijah as a very powerful prophet of Yahweh, and the significance of the Torah that Moshe gave. Because you have to have the Torah before you can have the spirit and the power. Because the Torah is the character of Yahweh. And that's what men needed to be turned to, the character of Yahweh. To make ready a people prepared for Yahweh. Even that is not finished yet. Yachanan, the immerser, just started it. It's not even finished yet. John chapter 1 and verse 19. Now this was the witness of Yachanan when Yehuda sent from Jerusalem priests and Levites to ask him, who are you? And he confessed and did not deny, but he said, I am not the Messiah. And they asked him, what then? Are you Eliyahu? Was John a reincarnation of Eliyahu? He said, I am not. Are you the prophet? And the prophet probably is a reference to either Moses or Eliyahu. And he says, no. He came in the spirit and the power. That is the way the coming of, and the two witnesses are going to come in the spirit and the power. They're going to have the same kind of spirit, but it's not going to be Eliyahu, because he's dead. And when he is resurrected, he's not going to die again like those two witnesses die. Is he? Because if he did, he'd be dying the second death. Doesn't happen. So what about this similar prophecy of withholding rain in Revelation 11:6? It says, these, talking about the two witnesses, Revelation 11:6, possess authority to shut up the heaven, that no rain falls in the day of their prophecy, and they possess authority over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they wish. When we think about plagues being called down, we think of Moses, don't we? Did Moses have the authority to do any of those plagues? No. Yahweh told him ahead of time what was going to happen, and he conveyed that as Yahweh's prophet to Pharaoh. Moses did not cause any of the plagues. They were the hand of Yahweh. When Elijah told the king of Israel, Ahab, that there was not going to be any rain, did Elijah cause there to be no rain? 1 Kings 18 and verse 1. And after many days it came to be that the word of Yahweh came to Eliyahu in the third year, saying, go present yourself to Ahab, and I give rain. He doesn't say, and you give him rain. No, he said, I will give him rain. Because guess what? I am the one who stopped up the heavens. If Eliyahu had caused it, he could have reversed it. He did not cause it. He only brought the word from Yahweh. But the two witnesses, they actually have authority from Yahweh to stop the rain. Eliyahu did not. Remember when Eliyahu was waiting for the rain, that Yahweh had put him in a cave, and he went out and looked, and And lo and behold, there was no rain. It didn't come in the thunder. It didn't come, in the mighty noises. It came with a still small voice, because Yahweh has the authority. He's going to give it to the two witnesses. But it's not the same as what Elijah had. So the two witnesses, are they prophets? Can messengers be prophets? Well, I would say the work of Gabriel, bringing all of these messages from Yahweh, made them prophets of Yahweh. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 6. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 6. John records this. I saw another messenger flying in the heaven, holding the everlasting Tov Basar. It's not exactly the same words there, but they're Tov words. They're the words. They're the prophecy. It's a prophecy. And the messengers are bringing it to announce to those dwelling on the earth, even to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. If that's not being done by a prophet, then I don't know what a prophet is. And yet it's messengers. Revelation chapter 22 and verse 8. Revelation chapter 22 and verse 8. And I, Yachanan, saw and heard these matters. And I heard and saw, and I fell down to worship before the feet of the messenger, maybe one of those, who showed me these matters. And he, the messenger, said to me, oh no, don't worship me, for I am your fellow servant, and I am of your brothers, the prophets. So it specifically said that messengers can be of the prophets. He's a brother of the prophets. And of those guarding the words of this book, worship Elohim. So what I've been trying to do is to get you to look at what the scriptures say, to harmonize various scriptures, to realize that you don't have to live with these difficult scriptures. When there is nothing that says being actually, if you look up the word lakak in a concise Hebrew lexicon, or if you were to look this up in probably the etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language, Hebrew and Aramaic, you'd find the same thing. Here's a long listing of lakak, which is that word to be taken. And down in here, you see that it is perfectly legitimate to understand that lakak can mean to be taken in death. When it says that, and it only says this about Enoch, so that he would not see death, I'm sure, because Yahweh is the one who buried him, that it is talking about that other people didn't see his death, that his death was not apparent, but he died. They all died. No one has ascended to heaven. No one has immortality except Yahshua. The scriptures are plain about that. You have to put all of the scriptures together. So that's what I'm trying to get you to do, to harmonize the various scriptures, even though they seem to conflict. Yahweh doesn't need us to tell him who the two witnesses are. We can speculate, and that's all it really is a speculation, but it is based on scriptural evidence. That Gabriel, standing on one side of the throne of Yahweh, and another messenger on the other side, and the only two that are mentioned besides Yahweh, the messenger Yahweh, are Michael and Gabriel. And so it does seem to fit, but if it isn't, so be it. Yahweh knows who they are, and they are going to do the work of Yahweh. It's not essential to your salvation to know. But if Yahweh's word reveals it, as I mentioned earlier, it is one more testimony that that day will not overtake believers as a thief in the night. May Yahweh bless you and guard you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and give you his favor. May Yahweh lift up his countenance over you and give you his peace. Yivarekeka Yahweh vayishmereka. Ya'er Yahweh panav aleka v'kaneka. Yasa Yahweh panav aleka v'yasem. L'ka shalom. Any more questions about the